All right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting episode of Daily December 2021. This is day 10, and I am back, folks. I am caught up. So, on a previous uh, video, actually my day 5 video where I talked about the real difference between Pathfinder and D&D 5e, um, one of my friends asked me about uh, is there kind of like a hierarchy um, of like least complicated RPGs to most complicated RPGs, where if you're introducing like maybe kids or someone extremely new to an RPG, would you start them here? Would you start them right with D&D 5e? Would you start them with Pathfinder or GURPS? Um, by the way, if anyone wants to know the most complicated RPG system ever, go with GURPS. It is mind-numbingly complicated. GURPS stands for Generic Universal Role-Playing System, and it is a nightmare. And for people that really love crunch, GURPS is perfect. For anyone that does not want to use an Excel spreadsheet to create your character, then maybe try something else. But that's kind of how I view RPGs. Is you have like really simple ones, which we'll talk about in a second here, all the way up to GURPS. And Pathfinder that are about one or two steps away from GURPS. They're not GURPS, but they're close to it. Especially once you get especially once you get to Pathfinder Second Edition. Pathfinder Second Edition takes some of the good ideas from Pathfinder First Edition and then just adds a bunch of complexity to it. And that was something that blew me away, because Pathfinder is a rules-heavy, complex game. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of people like it. Pathfinder Second Edition, at first, when I first started reading the book, I thought they were going to try and pull a D&D 5e. Because let's be 100% honest. Pathfinder is D&D. It used the system reference document for 3rd edition. It is D&D. As much as they technically are their own separate thing, it's D&D. They took a system that was already really good, added some different flavor to it and a couple quality of life changes, and called it their own. So when I saw Pathfinder 2nd edition, and the fact that during the tail end of 3rd edition, and then through I believe through most of 4th edition, or it might have happened right after 4th edition launched, Pathfinder was the number one RPG on the market. Now, it was not a massive market like it is now. RPGs were still a very niche market then, but Pathfinder superseded D&D 4th edition, and they were really proud about it. And then 5th edition came out, and Pathfinder is now taking a nosedive, especially since once they released Pathfinder 2nd edition, because technically they're two different games, they split their player base. And so now if you look at charts and things like that talk about which games are being played the most on things like Roll20 puts one out every so often. Pathfinder has dropped like a rock. It goes D&D 5th edition, Call of Cthulhu. At one point, I believe even 4th edition had more games than Pathfinder did, simply because they had two different versions of it that were kind of competing with each other. So when I saw 2nd edition, I thought, oh, they're going to do the same thing they did with the original Pathfinders. They're just going to take the SRD for 5th edition, which released, I believe, almost at the same time or shortly after the official game actually launched. They're just going to take that and they're going to make their own version of it. And when I first started looking through it, I could see like they took the advantage disadvantage system from 5th edition. I'm like, oh, cool. I might actually get into this, because again, the thing with Pathfinder was it was 3rd edition with a couple flavor changes and some quality of life changes. So in comparison, but between the two, technically, a lot of people consider Pathfinder D&D 3.75. It's a little bit more solid. It's definitely more solid than third edition. It's a little bit more solid than 3.5. So I'm like, hey, you know what? I could get behind that. I could get behind, despite the I think fifth edition is amazing. Um, I could get behind somebody making like a D&D 5.5 or something like that, calling it Pathfinder. But that's not what Pathfinder did. They took some of the ideas from 5th edition, like cantrips being at will and the advantage disadvantage system, and then they took and just added a whole bunch of complexity and nonsense to it, and now it is unbelievably complicated. Um, every character has 3 different kinds of feats that they have to keep track of. You have racial feats, you have skill feats, and then you have class feats. And they're all in different parts of the book, and every time you level up, you may get feats from 2 different kinds of feats on the same level. Like, it's the most mind-numbingly bonkers thing I've ever seen in my life. But anyway, getting back to the actual subject of this, I want to talk about kind of the range, and if you did want to introduce, kids to an RPG, this is how I think I would start. So, from my personal perspective, again, I am not all-knowing as far as RPGs are concerned. However, as far as complexity is faced for me, I would say at the low end of complexity, you have games like Lasers and Feelings. Lasers and Feelings is a game made by John Harper. It is released under the Creative Commons license, meaning it is copywritten, but as long as you are willing to list that it's copywritten under the Creative Commons license, you can do whatever you want with it. And so the cool thing about Lasers and Feelings is there is an entire genre of RPGs that are called Lasers and Feelings hacks. And what they are is Lasers and Feelings is a one-page RPG. It literally, the entirety of the RPG system, the whole thing, fits on a single 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, one side. That is the entire RPG system. It fits on a single piece of paper, and it is remarkable. The basics of a Lasers and Feelings game is generally they will give you a bunch of different styles that you can pick for your character. Like for Lasers and Feelings is basically you are playing Star Trek effectively. You are playing Star Trek. And so you create your character. So for Lasers and Feelings, you choose your style. Your style is things like alien, android, dangerous, heroic, hotshot, intrepid, or savvy. Your role, basically your job: doctor, envoy, engineer, explorer, pilot, scientist, soldier. Choose a number. And your number is what's going to make the game work. So you choose a number from 2 to 5. You can't choose 1 or 6, and everything is done by rolling 1 or more d6s. The higher the number, the more your character is good at lasers, which is technology, science, logic, stuff like that. Your Spock-type characters. The lower the number, your character is better at feelings, so intuition, diplomacy, seduction, passionate action, your Kirks. And then you give them a name. You give them a goal. And then you actually create your ship, and then you just go. There's actually even a little section that you can roll to create your space adventure. It is just this really, really cool, interesting, super, super simple system, because the way everything works is the GM describes the situation that you're in, and when you try to do something, you will roll a d6. The GM will tell you if you're prepared, so you can roll an additional d6, or if you're an expert in that particular thing, you roll a third d6. So you're playing, the GM describes something, one of the characters goes, I want to do this, okay? I think, roll a d6, and if you're using lasers, we're using science or reason to try and fix this problem. You want to roll under the number that you chose. So if you chose 5, you're a very lasers focused person. You would want to roll under when you roll a d6. You want to roll under if you're using lasers. If you're using feelings to solve this situation, we're using passion or rapport or something like that. You want to roll over the number. So characters that are very high lasers, are going to have an easier time doing checks that require lasers and feelings. And then depending on how many dice succeed, you either fail or succeed, and then you keep going. And it is a remarkably simple system that is super easy for anyone to understand. I didn't explain it super well here, but it's, for the most part, it's pretty easy to understand, especially once you start playing. And it has everything that you need to go. Like, you can literally just take out lasers and feelings. You can keep it in your back pocket. You can take it out, and when you're in line at Comic-Con or a convention, something, you can pull out lasers and feelings, and you can run a session right then. There's no prep work, nothing. You barely need to write anything down. It is that great a system. To give you an example of a hack of lasers and feelings, there's a system called Truth and Daring. All the systems work the exact same way, where they will have 2 words in them. And Truth and Daring is built around a group of 6th graders in the 1980s, basically running a kind of like Stranger Things style adventure. If I remember correctly, Hyper RPG actually had an entire campaign that they ran for multiple years, if I remember correctly, using one of these systems that I can't remember for the life of me which one it was. But if you just go to Google and type in lasers and feelings hacks, there are tons of them. And they have different flavor and different things, and each one is going to add maybe a little bit more complexity or a little bit less, but they're all just really simple, really fun. They are perfect for kids, especially if you find one like Truth and Daring is specifically geared towards a group of 6th graders in the 1980s. So this one is geared towards kids. Adults can play it too, but it can be a lot of fun for kids to have a game where they get to play characters their own age that are dealing with stuff that they would deal with. That's exactly what Truth or Daring is for. And then lasers and feelings. So that is on the low end of complexity, is these 1-page RPGs. They're brilliant, they're wonderful, they're free because they're all Creative Commons stuff, so you can't sell them. And they're just wonderful and amazing. Moving up a step from there gets complicated, to say the least. Generally, what I would say is the next step up would be a relatively simple class-based RPG. And that's generally where I tend to put D&D 5th edition. And before people going, no, D&D 5th edition is very, very... If you don't use any of the optional rules, that includes feats, D&D 5th edition is remarkably simple, especially if you use the starter set for D&D 5th edition, where it only gives you one subclass that you can choose. Like, that is about as basic as it gets as far as a class-based RPG. Now, the reason I say I tend to think class-based RPG before a classless one, because classless ones in general are going to be a little bit more complex. So going with a class-based RPG like D&D 5th edition would probably be the next step up for me personally. To be perfectly honest, I would love a simpler class-based RPG, because as much as D&D 5th edition is a relatively simple game before you start adding in optional rules and things like that, it's still a huge jump up from lasers and feelings. But I tend to think class-based RPGs are a little bit easier for someone to understand and learn from than jumping them directly into classless systems. That being said, if you're going for a class, I guess the other thing, and this is 100% not for children in any way, shape, or form, but Vampire the Masquerade and the World of Darkness systems, as far as complexity is concerned, they're not massively complex. I would consider them a little bit more along the lines of Rules Light. And depending on, again, depending on which one you get, because the World of Darkness series, I think there's 5 different RPGs in there. But I would say that compared to something like Pathfinder or something like that, or GURPS especially, I would say something along that line is going to be a little bit less complex as far as rules are concerned. Now, the issue with something like Vampire the Masquerade is those are very much adult games because they require a lot of emotional maturity to play. They would not be something I would ever introduce a child to as their first RPG. I would probably say I probably wouldn't have anyone younger than a teenager playing specifically Vampire the Masquerade. Some of the other ones like Mage the Ascension, you might be able to make it a little bit more kid friendly. But yeah, Vampire the Masquerade, there it is built around the idea of gray areas and questionable morality and things like that. Things that younger kids are not quite going to be able to understand extremely well. But that kind of system, I would say, complexity-wise, is not horrible. Again, it's not super simple. I'm not saying that Vampire the Masquerade or any of the World of Darkness games are super, super simple games. They are not. But as far as just the vast amount of rules required to play it, they don't have a ton. And they are kind of a bridge between a class-based and a classless RPG, because they do have, like in Vampire the Masquerade, you do have your vampire tribes or whatever they are, the flavor of vampire you are, that will dictate a little bit of how you're going to build your character. So that would be, kind of where I would go. The next step would be something like the basic version of D&D 5th edition, or something like Vampire the Masquerade, where there's not a ton of rules, and it allows, but it's still kind of class-based. There's still that direction. The very next step, before we get to D&D 5th edition with all the optional rules, which is further along, we're going to talk about things like Open Legend, I would also probably go as far as much as the Cypher system technically seems incredibly complicated, actually playing it is not. And that would, Cypher system is a class-based, but it's kind of did it different. So I would go Cypher system and Open Legend, where these are games that I tend to kind of group together as ambiguous, simply because a lot of the abilities that they give you, like for example, in Open Legend, first things first, Open Legend is 100% free. It's super great. It is a classless system, or a skill-based system, and there are no quote-unquote abilities in it. You do have these things called Banes and Boons, which are effectively, boons are effectively things that will positively affect other characters, and Banes are things that will negatively affect other characters, kind of like buffs and debuffs. If you're playing playing like an RPG or something like that, like an MMO or something like that. However, the majority of the things that you do are based on just using your skills. Like, you have a might skill. You have an agility skill. I think that's what it is. I always screw up what they are, because I run 7 different RPGs in my head. But anyway, so if you go into a room in Open Little Legend, and you go, hey, there's I need to get into this room. The door's locked. Okay, well, I want to try picking the lock. Okay, that's an agility roll. I want to break down the door. Okay, that's a might roll. You know what? You know what I want to do? Um, I want to try and climb through this window over here. Okay, that's an agility roll. You know what I want to do? Um, I want to go outside to around the other side and just see if there's a way to like jimmy the lock open, not break the door down, but just jimmy the lock. Okay, we can call that a might roll. Despite the fact that you're doing all these different things, they're all using basically the same thing. When you start getting into the like, they call them I think it's spectacular, in there. You have these certain skills that are things like energy. Energy is just a skill you have. If you are a fire mage, you would throw a fireball by rolling an energy check. Um, if you are a mystic knight that can light up their sword with fire, and so you're going in and you're going to swing with your flaming sword, that would also be an energy check. If you are effectively like Electro, where you can just kind of channel lightning energy through your fingers, that would also be an energy check. Another example from one of my Giga games, Aruna is a Goron that uses bombs for most of what he does. Um, Anytime he throws any kind of a bomb, they're all energy checks. So you all these different things, a fireball, an ice storm, throwing a bomb, creating a flaming sword, anything to do with raw energy, you would use an energy check for. And the reason I say that these are kind of the next step after very basic base version D&D 5th edition is because they are designed to be very, very fluid. And after the hardest thing to learn in something like Open Legend is how to stop looking for, okay, what are my abilities? What class am I? No, you just have a bunch of different skills that, however you decide to describe them, really the only limitations are how you describe your character. And that's something that we deal with in Realms of the Wild all the time, where theoretically, having points in certain skills can give you access to a bunch of different banes and boons and let you do all these different things. But would it make sense, like for Aruna, his energy is linked to his bombs. So would it make sense for him to be able to conjure an ice storm and attack people with an ice storm? Well, no, because he doesn't have ice powers. He has bombs, and so that's how the entire system is run. The Cypher system is done in kind of a similar way, where a lot of the abilities are very, very generic, and they're described very, very generically, so that when you build your character, which building a character in the Cypher system is remarkably simple. You pick 3 words. You are an adjective, noun, that verbs. That's what it is. You are adjective, which is your descriptor. Noun is your type. And verb is your focus. And that's how you build your character. And you can't literally just look at a bunch of words and go, okay, I am a brash Vector who fights without weapons. You've just built your character. There are a few other choices that you need to make, like you have to pick equipment and you have to pick a couple abilities. But for the most part, that's it. And you now have a character. It's really, really quick. It's really, really simple. And then the thing that's going to flavor your character is how you describe exactly what they do. There's a big difference between Iron Fist and Luke Cage. Despite the fact that both of them would kind of be described very similarly. I could describe both of them as they are brash Vector is basically a warrior. So they are brash warriors who fight without weapons. Both of them do that. However, Luke Cage is this huge kind of wall of muscle. And his big benefit is the fact that he is invulnerable. So he plays very, very differently than Iron Fist, who is a martial arts master and does flips and stuff, and he controls his chi in order to focus it into his fist and do all these other amazing things. So he's much more magical, but they both have the same descriptors, and they both could be built as a vector in the Cypher system without too much difficulty. And so those kind of systems I think are really, really nice. If you're talking about complexity, that would be the next level I would start to talking about, would be going something along those lines of the ambiguous things where you can put your own interpretation. Going the next step up, 5th edition with all the different bells and whistles and stuff like that, that starts getting relatively complicated. It's still pretty easy to make the jump from base 5th edition to more complex 5th edition, and it is, again, by far not the most complicated system out there. There are other systems that I would say are similar as far as complexity and the things like that. I'm trying to think. Star Trek Adventures, I would almost say, is kind of similar as far as complexity is concerned, in that general thing where there's a decent amount of complexity to it, but you're not getting feats every single level or something like that. Dungeon Crawl Classics is not. Dune Adventures in the Imperium is a new system that, again, is somewhat complex. I'd probably put it in the same way as like advanced versions of a 5th edition. The Dragon Age RPG, again, would be put in that same thing where it's somewhat complex, but not quite to the level of like a Pathfinder or D&D the 3rd edition, stuff like that. So yeah, Avatar Legends I would probably put in that same realm with it is designed for kids, but even just the quick start guide I have, it is a little bit more complex than like your base version D&D, where you're not making a ton of choices beyond choosing your class and your subclass and then leveling up. Avatar Legends is a little bit more complex than that. After that level, we start getting into what I would call more rules-heavy systems. This is where I would put D&D 3rd edition, Pathfinder Pathfinder 1st edition. 2nd edition I would put a little bit further. Things like Cyberpunk 2020 would kind of fit in that same realm as well. Shadowrun is another one. Shadowrun is technically a classless system, but they do have it is a skill-based system, but they have pre-selected groupings of skills that you can choose that have class names. So they have kind of classes. There are ways to put classes in it. Let's call it that. But all of those I would consider on that next tier up. For complexity's sake, they're generally not games that I would introduce someone to the world of RPGs with. They're a little bit more complex. Probably the most complex game I would introduce a new player to would be the tier just below 3rd edition or Pathfinder. So if we're making a number system to do, your tier 1 are your one-page RPGs. Tier 2 is going to be your D&D base edition. And class-based RPGs that don't really have a whole lot of choices within the class, where you pick your class and then you go. You may, when you level up, you may, put new attributes, but for the most part, you just follow a single path. So that would be level 2. Level 3 would be the open legends, the cipher systems, things like they're a little bit ambiguous so that you really have a lot of control over what you do, but they don't have tons and tons and tons of complexity added to them. So it's level 3. Level 4 is going to be advanced 5th edition stuff, and then, other things like the Dragon Age RPG stuff, like that Fantasy Age RPG would also be another one. Fantasy Age is what the Dragon Age RPG is based on. They're both really fun systems. Dragon Age RPG is effectively like the Strange is a version of the Cipher system. The Dragon Age RPG is a version of the Fantasy Age RPG, and they're both brilliant systems. And then moving up from that tier 4, tier 5 is going to be your D&D 3rd editions, your Pathfinder 1st editions. And again, tier 4 would probably be the most complex. I would introduce a brand new player to, if I could. If someone that's never played an RPG before comes up to me and says, I want to learn how to play Pathfinder, I can teach someone Pathfinder. Without too much difficulty. Like I said, it's a complex system. It's not impossible. But there's a lot that they have to learn very, very quickly in order to jump right in at Pathfinder level. But it's doable. But in a perfect world, I would start them on something like D&D 5th edition. If they've never played an RPG ever, if they have no idea what an RPG, I would start base version D&D 5th edition, or even easier if you just wanted to start them with Lasers and Feelings, or one of the hacks on that. That will teach them the basics of how role-playing works. And that's generally the hardest thing for people to learn when you give them a complex system, is when they see a system with all of these rules, they assume that these rules are going to tell them what to do in certain situations, and the rules don't do that. The rules in these complex systems are really just there to define how the character works, but it has nothing to do with how the character plays. Again, the thing about tabletop RPGs is, well, what can I do? You can do whatever you want, within reason. What do you want to do? That is the most difficult thing for most people to learn. So starting with something like Lasers and Feelings, where they don't have a ton of rules to kind of hold on to. It's like, well, this spell says that if I cast it, it'll do this, and this. That can be something that can actually be detrimental to them, because they can go, well, look at all these different rules. What are these rules should tell me what I'm supposed to do next? And they don't. If you use something really, really simple like Lasers and Feelings, then they really have no choice but to learn how to just make choices and go for it. So that would be kind of your tier 5. Tier 6 is where I would put something like Pathfinder 2nd edition. Trying to think of some other ones. No, I wouldn't say that. Starfinder is kind of the bridge between, like, because Starfinder is Pathfinder in space, but they did add a little bit of complexity in Starfinder that didn't exist in Pathfinder. So Starfinder might be up, because it was kind of the bridge between 1st and 2nd edition Pathfinder is a Starfinder. Warhammer, the Warhammer 40k systems of Giga games. There's a ton of different ones there. The ones I have Black Crusade, Deathwatch, Only War, and Rogue Trader. Those I would put on that kind of tier 6, where they are remarkably complex games. Yeah, and then finally tier 7. Tier 7 is GURPS, and I just leave GURPS on its own, because it is that complex and nuts. There are other systems that are as complex as GURPS. I don't own any of them, because GURPS is enough. I wouldn't recommend normal people play GURPS. Like, people that enjoy RPGs, I would not point them towards GURPS. One of my former friends, acquaintances, whatever you want to call them, gentleman by the name of Daniel Wallace. He loves GURPS, but he is such an analytically minded person. And we there's nothing wrong between us or anything like that. We just haven't spoken in years for no reason other than he lives in Germany. I live here. We just don't interact. But yeah, he absolutely adores GURPS. He GM'd a GURPS game that I played in for like 3 sessions, and I hated it so much. I was a much younger RPG player, and I didn't have the knowledge I had now. But I think we did like 3 sessions, and I wanted to do some combat in GURPS because I like getting introduced to combat in RPGs in general, just because it'll really help you figure out how the system works and what its strengths and weaknesses are. Simply because even if the system is not designed around combat is the most logical progression in any RPG system you're going to have. You're going to have specific actions you can take, and then specific outcomes. And so combat tends to be a nice place to start and get a good feel for a system. And then once you figure out how the combat works, you can kind of go with everything else. So even systems like Vampire the Masquerade, which is not a combat heavy system, it's not even a combat light system. You can go for months playing that game, never throwing a single punch. But getting into combat in that system is a nice way to see, oh, this is what it prioritizes. And so, yeah, 3 sessions where we did nothing. Like, he was a big fan of, like, sandbox RPGs where he basically just puts you in a world and you can do whatever you want. And I wanted a little bit more structure. I wanted something to happen. And so we spent 3 sessions just randomly talking to other people and doing nothing. And I went, you know what? This isn't for me. I'm not enjoying this. I feel like we're doing nothing. It is so massively complex. We also had an issue where I said I wanted to dual wield rapiers. And he's like, no, that's not possible. This is going to be a real RPG. I was like, dual wielding rapiers is a real thing. It's called the Florentine style of fencing used 2 rapiers. There are tons of manuals that show people using a pair of rapiers in that age, and that was the character I wanted to play. And he's like, no, you can't do that. Well, that's dumb. So yeah, anyway, Simon, I hope this kind of helped you get this idea. I would say that RPGs, there are simple RPGs that are designed for children, and there are complex RPGs that are still designed for children. Like I said, the Avatar Legends system, I would say, is a more complex system than most, and it is 100% geared towards children. So I would not say that simply because something is designed for children that it's going to be a simple game by any means or things like that. Generally, I would look more towards subject matter rather than complexity. And then, like I said, the lasers and feelings stuff is a brilliant way to introduce kids. Renegade has some really, really nice systems. Like, they had Kids on Bikes, which I know Hyper RPG actually had an entire like multi-year long series that they did using the Kids on Bikes system. They have a couple different flavors of Kids on Bikes by Renegade. It's a really nice system from what I understand. I don't actually own Kids on Bikes, but I'm familiar with it from Hyper RPG. And yeah, there's a bunch of really cool systems out there. But I would say if you want to introduce new young players, Lasers and Feelings are one of the hacks, is by far the best way to introduce someone, in my personal opinion, best way to introduce someone to RPGs that has never played one before. And you can customize them for children. When you want to get into something a little bit more complex, Tales from the Loop is a is a kind of it's geared towards kids. You play, it's a Stranger Things style kind of game, and it's a little bit more complex than Lasers and Feelings is going to be, but it's still going to be significantly less complicated than probably Tales of the Loop. I would probably put in that base fifth edition kind of tier 2 level thing where it's just it's really nice. It's made for kids. There's a lot of things like that. I think there's one. I think it's called No Thank You Danger. No, there's another system that's designed for kids. There's a lot of different systems that are designed to kids that are just designed to, that can be more complex, but still are good for children to be able to play. So I hope this makes more sense than I think it does. But yeah, those would be my recommendations. If you want to get new people in, I 100% I strongly recommend do Lasers and Feelings. Learn the system. It is by far one of the simplest systems you will ever learn. It's free. There's a billion different hacks out there for it for any kind of flavor you want, and it's massively fun. Beyond that, I think 5th edition is a wonderful first RPG. I think it is, especially if you. I would highly recommend, if you're, again, someone that has never played an RPG, you're trying to introduce them, physically get the starter kit or whatever it's called, the SRD effectively for it, and only give them the options that show up in the SRD. So you pick a class, there's only one subclass for every class. This is a perfect way to get them into the idea, because they do make some choices. They get to pick a race, they get to pick a background, they get to pick a class, but after that, most of their choices will be made for them, so they can get used to the idea of leveling up and their character getting more powerful and having access to more abilities and things like that, without having to worry about multi-classing and feats and all those other things. I think that is a perfect place to start people. Going all the way up to that tier 4 that I kind of mentioned, where the advanced version of 5th edition, I don't think anyone would be scared off of RPGs starting up to like 3 or tier 3 or 4. I have seen people that have started at tier 5 with D&D 3rd edition that after spending 2 hours or 3 hours building their character, they were like, you know what, I'm done. I don't want to play a game that it takes me 3 hours to start the game. This isn't fun for me. So I have seen people turned off by complex games like that as their first one. Does that mean you can't start someone on Pathfinder? No. I know a lot of people that Pathfinder or 3rd edition was their first version of first edition, first RPG that they ever played, and they're great now. But my recommendation, start with something a little bit more simple, a little bit more open, and get them used to the idea of being able to choose any action they want for their character, and that idea of, well, what can I do? What do you want to do? Get them used to that without a ton of rules for them to memorize, because the rules will become a crutch for them, and they will stick specifically to what the rules tell them that they can do, and they will never quite understand just how expansive even a rules heavy system like Pathfinder or 3rd edition. There is so much freedom and creativity that you can have in a system like that I see a lot of people just completely ignore, because they learned on a rules heavy system and never realized that, well, just because I don't have an ability that lets me do this doesn't mean that I can't. It means I get to be creative about it. Or just because this spell doesn't specifically say that it does this doesn't mean I can't try and use it that way. So yeah, hope that answered your question. I hope anyone else that's watching this, if you do enjoy talking like this I think would be a wonderful topic for a podcast or a roundtable discussion. If anyone, absolutely anyone, if you fervently believe that Pathfinder Second Edition is not only the greatest version of Pathfinder, but is the absolute perfect pinnacle of RPG design, and everything else is vastly inferior to it, or anywhere in between, the idea of super simple all the way up to super complex. If you would be interested in doing like a podcast or a stream or something like that, where we literally just talk about different RPGs and how we might introduce a new player to them, comment below. If enough people are interested in it for one of my daily Decembers, I will just do a roundtable discussion. I will probably stream it on Twitch because that is the easiest way for me to stream, and then I will upload it here. So anyone at all, doesn't matter what your favorite RPG is, what your least favorite, if you think D&D is the worst thing ever and anyone that plays it is stupid, put your name down there. Let me know that you'd like to talk, because I'd like to get a lot of different, if this was a thing, I would like to get a lot of different views. Again, I have very strong opinions on Pathfinder, especially Pathfinder 2nd Edition. A lot of those are from having really, really negative experiences with people that play Pathfinder, and the people that I call Pathfinder purists, who are not fun people to be around at all. Regular old Pathfinder players don't like Pathfinder purists, but they tend to be very vocal and annoying. So I have strong opinions about Pathfinder and rules complex systems in general. I would love to have someone that has the opposite opinion. I would love to have someone that has completely different opinions. Daniel Wallace, if you ever watch this again, I don't know if you even remember that at one point we were acquainted. But if you want to get on this topic, I would love to talk to you again, or anyone else that's interested. Just let me know in the comments below, and if enough people are interested, I will find a way to do this sometime in daily December, because I like doing stuff like that. I like talking to people. Otherwise, again, that's all for me today. I will see you guys next time. All right, bye bye.